Good afternoon and welcome to our final panel of the day on Thursday, celebrating our 100,000th student enrolled in college by Tennessee Achieves. Really glad that you could join us today as we talk about one of our newest programs inside the Tennessee Achieves program, Knox Promise. It's a really exciting program that's showing, well, I would say a lot of promise. That's a lot of promise in one sentence there, but it is showing a lot of promise and we're really excited about it. For our audience members, a couple of real quick housekeeping things. You will notice that your camera's off and that you're muted. There's a couple of different ways for you to interact with us. At the bottom of the screen, you should see a chat box that allows you to interact with one another as audience members, as well as with the panel. And then there's also a Q&A box. Chrissy is going to moderate our panel today. I'm going to introduce her here in just one moment. But you do have an opportunity today to get your questions answered. So you can type your questions into either of those boxes. I will be monitoring those. We're going to do some prepared questions for the first 40 or 45 minutes, and then we will get to your audience questions at the end. So please fill out the form, send us audience questions. We want to make sure that you have a good understanding of everything before we leave here today. But with that, I think for the third time today, I'm going to introduce you to my boss, Tennessee Achieves founding first, only ever executive director, the leader of our team, and my partner in crime and friend for the last 11 years, Chrissy.
Thanks, Graham. I feel like it started off with like really grand introductions for Graham, and now it's like, here's my boss, Chrissy. But I'm so excited. Sorry, I'm punchy after this is my third panel to moderate today, and I'm so excited to share Knox Promise with all of you. Graham mentioned that it's a new program to Tennessee Achieves, but it's also one of my favorite programs we've ever launched in the last 12 years of doing this work. When I talk about Knox Promise, I always think about how the beauty of Tennessee Promise, when we launched statewide, it allowed us to share our mission at scale. And so we were able to go wide with the work that we were doing. And Knox Promise has been a revelation in many ways for me because it's allowed us to go deeper than I ever imagined we would be able to do. And so I'm thrilled to share Knox Promise with you. I will tell you this very quickly. Knox Promise is a program for Knox County High School students who, when they graduate, retain their Tennessee Promise eligibility, meaning mostly that they land at an eligible Tennessee Promise institution, one of our community or technical colleges, or one of our four-year institutions offering associate's degrees. But it layers additional support for the student. First, it provides a textbook stipend each semester for all students. Second, it provides what we refer to as completion grant funding for students. Oftentimes we know our students face all sorts of different life challenges that prevent them from earning that all-important post-secondary credential. And so the completion grants really provide an extra layer of financial support for additional book costs, or for specifically during COVID, we bought a lot of computers for students so they could be successful in online courses. And finally, the most important piece for me is that every student receives a completion coach, someone to walk alongside them on this post-secondary journey. Different from the mentor. We love our mentors. Mentors are a wonderful asset for students as they make the transition from high school to college. The coach, on the other hand, really serves as that someone in your corner, proactively reaching out to the students to build relationships and ensure the student has all the tools they need to earn a college degree. So that's Knox Promise in a nutshell, but we're gonna really have a chance today to dive in. So I'm gonna briefly introduce you to our panelists, and then we're gonna jump into questions. First, I have Sam Guter from SCORE, Tennessee SCORE. Sam serves as the Senior Director of Post-Secondary Impact. I can tell you this, when I first met Sam, she was working in Governor Haslam's office, and I was instantly like such a fan of Sam because she puts students first. But over the last year and a half, I mean, Sam and I are like best friends. We talk every day, and it's always about student success. So I'm super excited that she could join us today. Second, we have JC Skelton, who is a managing complete coach and is actually the lead for Knox Promise at Tennessee Achieves. This is JC's second year, right? A little over 2 years.
Right,
JC.
a little bit more.
I love it. With Tennessee Achieves. We snatched her away from the Peace Corps, so she's still doing really important work. I think JC is such a dynamic coach. She cares deeply for her students, and it shows every month. We track their interactions, and it shows every single month. And then finally, we have Siobhan Curdy, a 2019 Roan State student who is a Knox Promise participant, and I will let him share a bit more of his story. But Sam, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you talk a little bit about SCORE's role with Knox Promise and really the origin story of Knox Promise?
Absolutely. And thanks, Chrissy. And working with Tennessee Achieves is always such a blessing and honor. And just want to first say congratulations on enrolling 100,000 students. This is an exciting week, and really the power of Knox Promise going so deep in a community is a good example to be talking about. And I'm so excited to tell the origin story. But I work at SCORE, which is the state collaborative on reforming education. And we work to ensure that public education in Tennessee continues to deliver on academic progress for students from kindergarten through career. For the first 10 years as an organization, we were focused squarely on K through 12 education and ensuring students are successful after K through 12. But we focused our policy efforts within K through 12. And over the last year, have gone beyond students when they graduate from high school. How are they successful in post-secondary? And really one of the first ways that we also went into that space going deep was through Knox Promise. And so it's special to me. It was one of the first projects I worked on when I came back from maternity leave after having my daughter. And at the time, it was just this big idea. And it was the spring of 2019. And it's really where the generosity and genuine goodwill of Mr. Jim Haslam, the founder and CEO of Pilot Corporation, he wanted to make a significant investment in Knox County. And he came to SCORE to ask, knowing that we were research and policy advocacy organization that works statewide, but he wanted to get our advice and have us write some recommendations on what could a policy and practice solution in Knox County look like to ensure students are college and career ready, that they access higher education, and that they're successful. And so those were really the broad strokes that he painted and asked us to pitch some ideas and recommendations around an investment that he could make. And so with those broad guardrails in mind of college and career readiness, access, and success for students, we came up with, we did a national scan of emerging policy topics and ideas across the country that were moving the needle for students, that we saw this as an opportunity for really to prove what's possible in a community in Tennessee. And so pitched some ideas to him, had a short list of, I think, 3 to 4 ideas. And one idea that he really, really liked was an idea around providing micro grants, is what we called them in the beginning, because that's what we found nationally.
God, we called them micro grants.
I was going through my old notes in preparation for this, and micro grants a lot, and that was kind of where it started. Was what if you provided students with small, I say small dollar, $2,000 or less, to ensure that they can fill in gaps where needed in terms of expenses that go beyond tuition, knowing that Tennessee Promise in Tennessee provides tuition-free community and technical college, but we know that students have, and Siobhan, so glad that you're on this panel to speak to things that we know students have in their lives that cost money and can be a barrier to accessing and succeeding in higher education. And so it's an idea around what if you could target student micro grants to provide needs for students that could really ensure their success, and prove a return on investment for the state with Tennessee Promise. And so he liked that idea. Mr. Haslam himself was a first-generation college student at the University of Tennessee, believes in the power and the generational impact of higher education. And so it was an idea that I just remember the spark in his eye, and he gave us the green light to build out a plan. And so I say Knox Promise is where the generosity and that genuine goodwill met a can-do spirit, because when it was time to put that plan into action, I'll never forget calling Chrissy and telling her, hey, there's an opportunity. Can you help us map this out? And so got in a room with Dr. Anthony Wise, knowing that a lot of the students would be going to Pellissippi State Community College, but knowing many would also go to Roane State like Siobhan and other institutions, wanted it to be something that wasn't specific institution based, but based on Knox County High School graduates going on and utilizing Tennessee Promise. And so in our national scan of research-based best practices in the microgrant space, a lot of the programs were institution specific and really had a hard time nailing down a best-in-class example of something that was not at a specific institution where they can either forgive a student debt, provide emergency grants through their student account, or other means, but needing to imagine a community-based approach. And so was grateful early on with Tennessee Achieves being able to map that out, and then quickly made it happen. If you're following this origin story, it was an idea in spring of 2019. We announced the program in June of 2019 at Fulton High School in Knoxville, and then it was then implemented last fall. So, it quickly and rapidly went from, a very generous funder and that goodwill to becoming an actual program that's changing lives. And so we can get into more detail, but that's the broad strokes of the origin story, and the role and the connection that I played was pitching an idea and then quickly making it happen, rolling up our sleeves with that can-do spirit.
Yeah, I just remember, especially at the launch, how excited Mr. Haslam was also to be like sharing this news with the community. I mean, he's such a generous person, but this was, just a real investment without any strings attached. I mean, you referenced like a national scan. And oftentimes when you hear of micro grants or emergency grants, there are lots of strings attached. And it was really important to us and to SCORE, but also to Mr. Haslam, that this was easy for students. Can you talk about that philosophy for a bit, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm talking and saying that term microgrants ad nauseum, but that was really where this all started. That was what Mr. Haslam believed in. And I think that he didn't want it to be something that was a bureaucratic process that a student had to go through. He wanted it to be something that was simple for students. I think, a couple, if you're following the origin story again, a couple of months back, there had been the wildfires in Gatlinburg, and kind of a way that I told the idea and the concept of a micro grant was the Dolly Parton My People Fund, and how she supported her community. And I think that idea like spoke to him, because it was something that could really reach a student in a time of need. And, when a student, like we in higher education uses the flat tire example a lot, a student leaves their class, they have a flat tire, and then they give up on their classes. And so we use that example with Mr. Haslam, and in his mind, he was like, well, when you get a flat tire, you just need to take care of it. There's no time to like go fill out a form, to go do all the things, like to go through all the steps, to get the sign off from 3 different people. I think he wanted it to be something that, of course, needed to go through some checks and balances, but wanted it to be simple and straightforward for students to truly get access to those dollars when they need them. And so the micro grants, and now we call them completion grants, is where it all started, because that's really where his heart was ensuring that there was a way for a student to get what they needed very quickly, to ensure that a barrier doesn't cause them to stop out.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we were able to turn everything around like within 24 to 48 hours here. So that philosophy has certainly carried through with the approach. So JC, I want to talk to you. You've been a completion coach since you came to Tennessee Achieves. Talk to me about the role that you play as a coach and why it's so critical to student success.
Being a coach is a lot of fun. My job is really just to talk to students all day, get to know them. We really try to focus on being relational. We want to get to know the students and just be that extra resource and support for them while they're using Tennessee Promise. Chrissy mentioned we are different from their original mentor. We kind of step in after the mentor's role has kind of completed and they're enrolling in college and starting that experience at whatever institution they enroll in. we step in and are there to kind of take over and make sure they're able to complete college. We want to answer their questions, point them in the right direction of someone on campus. And I think that in our first year of Knox Promise specifically, we've done a really good job of working with the institutions and getting to know people on those campuses that we can point students to. It can sometimes be a daunting task for a student to figure out exactly what office they need to go to with their question at a college and who it is that can help them get what they need the quickest. So the role of a complete coach is just kind of to bridge that together. We can reach out to someone that we know at the college for them, or we can point them in the direction of those people who they need to be in contact with for whatever their issue is. We're there to help them problem solve and figure out what they need to do next. We're there to celebrate with them. Some of my favorite text messages that I receive are when students make a good grade on a test they were really nervous about, or they passed a midterm or something like that, and they text me and let me know that they did it. And it's always really exciting to hear those things because we do want to build a relationship with the student. And I think that relationship is what really makes Knox Promise special. Money can solve and help a lot of problems for students. As far as the completion grants go, it can help with a laptop and transportation and things like that. But there are so many other important barriers that students need help with that I think a coach can really step in and help them with. It's always exciting to see our students complete their program, and we're also there to bridge them to their next steps, whether that be a career and a student wants me to look at their resume or help them job search or something like that, or even transferring to their next four-year institution where they might pursue a bachelor's degree. It's always exciting to get to go through this process with students and just get to know them along the way.
So as a Knox Promise coach, do you wait for the students to reach out to you? How does that process work?
So we do not. We reach out to students typically about once a month. It kind of depends on the time of year. Sometimes we reach out to them more often. Last year, it was really exciting. We got to meet them on campus in person. We went to Mississippi a couple of different times in Rome State, and everywhere where our students were, we went to them. I think that's the beauty of Knox Promise and it being based in Knoxville. All of the Knox Promise coaches live in Knoxville as well. So it's really easy for us to pop over and meet a student for lunch or talk to them, meet with them, and sometimes even like walk them to the specific office that they need to go to on campus. Of course, shifted a little bit with COVID. We're not on campus anymore, but we are meeting with students virtually, which isn't quite as good, but it's also been really fun and I think just as meaningful. So we reach out to students at least once a month, sometimes more. And so it gives us a pretty solid foundation to build that relationship, talking to them that often and just seeing where they go throughout the year.
That's great. Okay, Siobhan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your story to post-secondary, where you go, what you're majoring in?
Okay, no problem. Thank you for the introduction, and just wanted to say thank you for having me here today. And as I'm sure you guys already know, my name's Siobhan, and I'm Kurdish, and I'm from Kurdistan. If you don't know where that is, that's north of Iraq in the Middle Eastern. And we originally came to United States for a better education and a better life, and being able to be in Tennessee and going to Roane State and having the Knox Promise and the completion grant helping me with that. It really helps a lot, especially with the coaches. They do a great job at answering your questions and whatnot. As a college student, it's important for you to get a response quick and easy, because everyone has things going on in college. And when you have a coach like Brandon, man, he's a great coach. He always helps me out. Sometimes I'm not able to reach out to him as often, but like JC said, they help us. They reach us when we are too busy and occupied with our classes and whatnot. And recently this year, I believe it was the completion grant. I actually ran into a little trouble where everything went on to virtual classes, meaning everything went on to online. And I was struggling with having a device. So I didn't know, I had my phone, but you can't really do much on your phone. So I talked to Brandon about it, and he was able to actually help me out and receive a laptop, which was crazy. I mean, I was very blessed to hear that he was going to be able to help me out. He also actually got me a printer, which is impressive because I mean, I like to read here and there, and I haven't seen any other states that do that. So hearing that, being able to be a part of this Knox Promise here, it's great, and I'm glad to be here because I'm making myself proud, I'm making my family proud, and that's all it is to it. So yeah, thank you guys for that.
Yeah, no, Brandon is a great coach. I'm glad that you guys have built a good relationship.
Yeah.
So I was the first person, Siobhan, in my family to go to college. Neither of my parents were able to go. Are you the first in your family to go to college?
No, actually. So we're a family of, I believe, 7. So I have an older sister. My sister's the oldest, and then I have a brother after her, and then it's me, and then I have 2 younger sisters. So my older siblings, they've been to college already. In fact, my brother, he's about to finish his criminal justice uh, associate degree. So in a couple months, he'll be a police officer, as you know it.
That's
And then
great.
yeah,
Congratulations to him.
appreciate that. And but I'm the biggest one in the family. Like I'm the one that's willing to go all the way up, and I'm trying to become a surgeon. So it's
Oh,
got
wow.
yeah. So it's an orthopedic surgeon. It takes about 16 years because you got to go through college. I mean, like med and pre-med, and it's a lot of work, but I'm willing to do that. And so far, these coaches, they've helped me to do that, and it's great.
That's so great. So can you you've talked about the fact that Knox Promise was helpful to you. Any roadblocks outside of the computer that you have faced in your journey to post-secondary? You sound very motivated. So it sounds like you would persevere, but any specific roadblocks? I mean, it helps all of us get a good mindset around what kind of programs we should launch to help students who are motivated and talented like you.
I mean, like I said, you guys do a great job. Something that maybe could be helpful. Roan State already does this, but they do. I think you're only required. You can only do 1 hour. I think I tried to do more than a couple hours with one tutor, and they wouldn't allow that. I'm not sure why, but maybe that's just some kind of boundary that they have. Maybe they're not wanting students to take too much advantage of having 3 hours with one teacher and then not show up. Because I can see that happening. I mean, sometimes they make an appointment and they never show up, or it just wouldn't be fair to them, and it wouldn't be fair to the students. So they made it to where it's 1 hour. I personally would like to have more hours, just that way I can get a better understanding. I can build a bond like I do with my coaches. Like I can build a bond with the tutor and make it easier for the subject to be more understandable.
I think that's a really good point. I think tutoring is so important. So I think if there are any students out there listening, utilize the tutor, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Completely agree.
Yeah, they're actually the Roan State tutoring session. They're widely open, and it's just sad that not a lot of students are taking advantage of it when they really should be.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am.
So JC, a big part of the coaching role, it's a great segment, is community navigation. So it's not only about navigating the post-secondary experience, but also navigating community resources. So because of Knox Promise and this deep dive we've been talking about, we've been helping students who are facing food insecurity and homelessness and a plethora of other challenges that we all knew existed, but the extent, I think, was a surprise to all of us when we first launched this program. And so we were so happy to dig in. Talk to me a bit about that role and what makes Knox Promise different from what we're able to offer students in our other 89 counties.
So through these relationships that we build with students, we really are able to learn like exactly what specific students need. And I think that's really important because everyone does have different barriers and different difficulties as they're navigating post-secondary. And quite a few of these problems have nothing to do with the college or the courses themselves. There's a lot of outside factors. I know in an earlier panel, Chrissy had mentioned how people were shocked at what a big issue transportation can be for students. While in Knox County, that's not a widely like issue because it isn't as rural as a place as some other counties in Tennessee. That is a challenge that a lot of students face. So I think that all of the Knox Promise coaches have become pros at navigating all of the bus systems and trying to figure out exactly where they go and helping students figure out if they can ride the bus to classes on certain days when they're not able to get a ride or carpool with classmates or family members. So just really figuring out other ways that we can help students have issues with food insecurity as well, and they can always apply for completion grants. We do allow them to get gift cards to places like Kroger is a very popular one, just to help students, get a little bit ahead on their groceries. Most of our students work a lot. You'd be surprised how many of our students do work full time, and that can be really hard to navigate. They're saving up for, some of them live on their own and they're having to pay all of their bills themselves or help their family. For big families like Siobhan, I have a lot of students who have a lot of siblings and it's their responsibility to help take care of their family as well. And so they're saving that money, but that can be really hard to do. So one of the cool things about Knox Promise is getting that supplemental thing with completion grants and book stipends where students aren't having to save the money for different things that we can help with, and they're getting to use that money for what they need or what their family needs. And it just kind of helps offset the cost of a couple of things that are related to college, because there are so many other issues that students are facing. And I think Knox Promise is really bringing that to the forefront. We're learning about all of these issues that students have that we may not have known about otherwise. And it's really great being a coach and actually being able to offer advice to them and getting into our community, figuring out where students can go if they need shelter for just a couple of days while they're, transitioning their living situation or something like that, and offering the completion grants, especially during COVID. Those have been extremely beneficial to a lot of our students. During the month of August, I think our completion grant submissions doubled just in that month from the last year. And I think that was largely due to COVID and just students really knowing that they have that opportunity there in front of them. Some students, don't always realize that it's there. So we try to tell them as much as we can, utilize this money. It's here for you to use it. And it's really been fun seeing all of our students take advantage of that over the summer.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of part of the magic that, we oftentimes talk at Tennessee Achieves about how the funding is the carrot, right? At Tennessee Promise specifically, the funding brings students and families to the program, and then we're able to wrap our arms around that student and really shepherd them through their post-secondary journey. And I think completion grants, it's the same philosophy that yes, they're critically important, but I think because the coach is attached to the other end of the completion grant, it allows for much more success. I can think about in the early days, Taylor, one of our Knox Promise coaches, spending a lot of time trying to research the exact TCAT tools. And then he met the student to deliver the TCAT tools. And now he and that student have a great relationship. So it's not always about the money. For me, what I found to be successful over the last 12 years is how deep can we build these relationships and how well do we know our students? I always sort of think back to 12 years ago when we first launched Knox Achieves, and it was just me. And I knew all the students. Like, I would walk down the street now in Knoxville and run into one of our students who, now is 12 years older than they were. And we still know one another and I know their mama. And that's what we're trying to bring back with the coaching. And I do think that that's what really makes Knox Promise so special. But Sam, I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the critical component of Knox Promise? You're on the outside, very much a partner to Tennessee Achieves, but on the outside looking in, why do you think this work is so critical?
Gosh, well, I think it's, all the many pieces working together. I think when we started rolling up our sleeves and thinking about what this program should do and be designed to do, it was really doing something different. And I think, over the last decade in Tennessee, as Tennessee Achieves, you all have discussed this week, with all the different guests you've had, like thinking about, despite like the gradual improvements in completion rates for first-time full-time students at our community and technical colleges across the state, only 25% of students complete a credential over 3 years. And if post-secondary education remains essential to economic opportunity for students, we know that the state's current success rates are impeding the students' ability to find meaningful work that advances them socially. So that's kind of where this all started, of like, the system isn't, the system can be improved. How can we do something different to move the needle and to ensure that students can propel themselves forward and overcome those data points that we know stand in the way? And so I think that, it's pretty clear here that the completion coach helps to connect the dots with the completion grants. Now I'm calling them micro grants again, back to the beginning, but the completion grant that supports students to have emergencies covered, the textbook stipend, that's kind of where it started. But then when we started mapping out and rolling up our sleeves, developing and designing the program, it became clear, and Chrissy, credit you making the point from the beginning, and you were proved right, that the coach really is the connector to the grant. And the coach can have a carrot to work with and a tool in the toolbox. But and I think that it's those two paired together that are so impactful. I think I'll say one piece that it may not be known broadly, but through the overall Knox Promise effort, we're also conducting a research study of the program. And so SCORE and Tennessee Achieves have engaged the University of Tennessee Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research to study enrollment and retention trends and the overall impact of the Knox Promise program for students. And so, I think that we'll be able to see year-to-year trends and kind of course correct as needed, which I think is so important. But really what we've seen so far is that it's been important to be able to back up what everyone is coming together to do for students in a way that is data-driven day to day. And I think that those long-term outcomes of economic opportunity for students and improving the completion rates as a state and as a Knox County community, I think that the research study will be something that's not talked about, it's more foundational, but something that from my connection point is important to telling the story eventually. And I think that just since we're doing something so different, it's important to be able to study it and to prove through evidence and research that it's working and supporting students in the ways that it was designed to.
No, I think it's incredibly important that we're studying it. I mean, and this will come later. I'm going to talk to you about the scalability of the program, but I think we've got to start measuring from day one, right? And I think when we came together to talk about this was a priority for both SCORE and Tennessee Achieves. Let's figure out which components are working, which components are not working, to really think about how we could potentially offer Knox Promise to every student across Tennessee. Siobhan, what do you think is the most critical component of Knox Promise? So same question to you, but from a student perspective. I think you're muted, Siobhan. We can't hear you. That's
sorry.
better.
The components of Knox Promise, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Most critical to you as a student.
Well, what you guys been talking about financially, for sure. But another thing that I'd like to really stick on is the mentor, the coach, being interactive with the students and really reaching out to them and about deadlines as well. Let's see. It was a couple deadlines for the what was it? It was, the community service. That's what it was. Yeah, it was a community service, and we needed to get 8 hours for each semester, and I was able to use that 8 hours community service into a field that I was interested in. So I decided to shadow my doctor. I decided to shadow my orthopedic doctor 8 hours for each semester. And as I was doing that, I decided, I was building up relationship with my doctor. So the very last time I did it, shadowing him, it was great because by then we bonded quite well, and we decided if I decide to stay in Knoxville or in Oak Ridge, he would be able to give me a job, which was pretty interesting. But yeah, I think that's the most important, keeping you updated, just being interactive with the students is really important for me.
Good. They're there to nudge you along, even when you don't think you need it, right?
Exactly. Yes. I personally, I've always tried to handle things on my own, and I've done that, but having like a little bit of assistance when you think you don't need it, it really helps. It helps a lot more than you can imagine, really.
That's fantastic. Okay, JC, from the coach's perspective, and I'm going to give you free reign to brag on yourself if you would like, but what do you think is the most critical component of Knox Promise?
Well, I think we can all agree now, it seems, that the coach is just so important. Like Siobhan said, the financial part is very important to some students, but the coach is really the one who kind of puts those pieces together for the student. We get to know them, know their needs, and we're able to point them in the direction that's best suited for them. We have a lot of experience kind of taking what we have heard from students and then plugging them in to the right places. It's not always a one size fits all for students. So it is important for us to really get to know them, to know what would be the best for them specifically. And I think just bridging them to where they need to be at the college, reminding them of things that you might not think of when you're kind of bogged down in all of that schoolwork, getting involved on campus, sharing our own experiences. I know I tell all of my students to study abroad because that was my favorite part of college. So I think that just reminding them that there are things to think about other than just their next deadline, their next test score. There's a lot more to college, and we can kind of be there to nudge them along, point them in the right directions, and kind of just pump them up to get involved in more ways than they are at that moment. So I definitely think that having the coach relationship is extremely important for students. And I just love seeing the growth of all of my students over the past 2 years. So that has been really fun. And I do think that some of them would agree with me that it's been helpful to have that, just like Siobhan said, assistance along the way, even if you don't think that you do need it. Because a lot of them would have done great on their own. But I like to think that I helped them some. So the coach, I think, is important.
Oh, obviously I agree. And I think Sam brought up a really great point. It's sort of the connector, the core, the heart of Knox Promise. But I would be remiss if we didn't talk about, right, the $87,000 that we distributed in completion grant funding in 1 year. And JC mentioned this, but we spent almost 40,000, 35,000 of that in 1 month as students were gearing up for this particular semester, thinking about all the effects of COVID. One student in particular, so I see all completion grants before they actually leave Tennessee Achieves, and one student was facing the elimination of their electricity. Both parents had lost their jobs because of COVID, and they were very behind. And so we were able to supplement so the family could in fact have electricity. And so, it's heartbreaking, but also I think there is a huge optimistic sense in this program that a little can go a long way. And then going back to the coach, though, the coach will continue to follow up with that student. It's not like, here's your funding, right? It's then, how are you? How's your family? It's not all academic. I believe that, gosh, after doing this for 12 years, the majority of students who leave the post-secondary pipeline, they don't leave because of the academic piece. They leave because of all of these other challenges that stand in their way. And Knox Promise is helping to break those down. Okay, Sam, let's talk about taking this to scale. So I have this grand vision of trying to figure out how to make this feasible to provide to every student. I will tell you, amongst all the coaches, when all 16 of them are together, the 11 are very jealous of the 5 that are under the Knox Promise umbrella, and they all want it for their students. So how do we make this work? Do you think it's a good idea?
Yes. Yeah, I think that from the beginning, and the way that SCORE, that we work, we're statewide policy advocacy for education. And so we monitor progress across the state. Where's innovation happening? Where can we support to activate and pilot innovation? And really to then take all of that and prioritize an agenda, an education agenda for the state to inform and influence state policy. And so from the very beginning, when it was clear that Knox Promise was changing the game, really wanted to think about how can we, and I see there's a question in the chat about how other counties can replicate and learn from Knox Promise. There was early on, I think like 4 months into the program last December, Chrissy, there was a group of folks from across the state that came to a convening to talk about state and local policy in terms of K-12 and higher education. And there was significant interest among the group of national and in-state partners of the work of Knox Promise and how to potentially replicate in other communities. And so I think that back to the research study, that's why it's important to learn, like, what are the key elements? What's the true cost per student when you do it at a bare bones level? And how do you ensure that there is a coach element or an advisor or some person that is working closely with the student? And then I will say too, statewide, I mentioned in the beginning that when we first did that national scan of microgrants broadly, found that these are programs that are largely happening at institutions through support of philanthropy or institutional resource. And I think that's why Knox Promise is so important, to see how can you do this from a community level, because there's not really a state that is doing this at scale. Texas had a bill last year that would create a pilot program through their higher education coordinating body that would have taken it to scale. Tennessee had a bill last year. There was significant interest from the Tennessee General Assembly in developing a statewide program based on the concept of Knox Promise. And Knox Promise was actually talked about in the House Education Committee. The bill was considered, it would have required the Tennessee Higher Education Commission to create a 4-year pilot program from a pilot program, but take it more statewide, to award completion grants to Tennessee Promise scholarship recipients who demonstrated an immediate financial need. And so it would have allowed THEC to partner with Tennessee Achieves and the Ayers Foundation in their counties to create a pilot program to take it statewide, paired with the complete coaching initiative. And so I think that, so the bill passed through the House Education Committees and made it to the Finance Committee, but then of course the pandemic happened and an emergency budget was passed. So things were held up this past year, but I think it's something that we will continue to work with the state legislature to support and to think about creatively on how could a program like this be done at scale from a state level, knowing that it's something that is done predominantly across the country at institutions on a much smaller scale, but how can you create a statewide initiative and take what we've learned from Knox Promise? So yes, I think that as Tennessee has been a leader in higher education reform and K-12 education reform over the last decade, particularly with Tennessee Promise in 2015, and the partnerships that state government has with Tennessee Achieves and other organizations, I think that it's doable. And I think that we can think differently about how to make this, what's happening in Knox County, true across the state. And so trying to think creatively about that, both in terms of how do you do it from a roll up your sleeves, can do spirit, like Knox Promise was started under, but also how do you make it systemically true to be paired with Tennessee Promise supports as well.
Yeah, and how do we make sure that what we do is meaningful, right? I mean, I think that's always, the lens through which we work. I will say that early indicators of success are promising, not to play on the pun of Knox Promise, but we're showing a 91% fall to spring retention for these students. Yesterday, Dr. Anthony Wise with Pellissippi State was saying typically they see about 77 to 78%. And so a significant difference in a typical fall to spring retention for freshmen, first-time full-time freshmen versus what we're seeing with Knox Promise. So if the trend continues, we do have a solid foundation to build upon. Okay, so we've made it to the fun part of the questions that we're asking all panelists. So the first question, and Siobhan, I'll start with you. So what is one lesson that you learned from your very first job? And when I say very first job, I mean like your first job. And I've explained, like when I was 14, I walked to the Dottie West baseball field in McMinnville, Tennessee, and made snow cones in the concession stand. So Siobhan, first job and a really important lesson.
That would be communicating with customers. I was working as a cashier or, drive-through, that works as well. You really get to interact with the customer, and, you're kind of on a spot there, and you got to take their order, and you got to make sure you're not messing up, or you want to try to do your best and get their order right. So I would say communicating. That I learned that at my very first job.
That's really great advice. How about you, JC?
So for my very first job, I worked in the nursery at the church that I went to growing up in Erin, Tennessee, which is really small town in Middle Tennessee. And I still have such great relationships with who was my boss. She was the pastor, the children's pastor, and I still have such a great relationship with her. She still writes me recommendations to this day if I need them. So I think that building relationships and maintaining those relationships is something that I learned that was really important and that I have stuck with to this day.
That's great. How about you, Sam? First job advice. What'd you learn?
Man. I worked my first job when I was in high school. I worked at it was like a gift shop in South Alabama called Custom Stitches. And we did like monogramming, had all these fun bags. And I was a customer sales associate. And so when I wasn't in the front of the shop asking, how can I help you? I was in the back wrapping gifts. And I think that there were a lot of employees that would do quality over or quantity over quality in terms of wrapping, would just whip them out, and the owner would come in and just make people redo them because they were very particular about how gifts were wrapped. But I learned that attention to detail and taking your time sometimes really goes a long way, because I was just very particular in terms of how I wanted to meet the standard that was set. And so my frilly bows that I made were perfect by the end of my 2 or 3 years working there. So just really learned that sometimes taking your time and putting your best foot forward and just trying your very, very best, even if the package didn't look completely perfect, at least I felt good about what I was doing and didn't have to redo it. Like some other folks did. But sometimes I think just focusing on the details and taking your time, taking a deep breath really goes a long way.
I bet you're like a ninja during the holidays. Can you come wrap all my gifts for me? I hate that job so much.
Something at the time I didn't think about, but I was like, this is just, a life skill that
really is a life skill. So great. Okay, final question before we bring Graham back. So you got to be super quick on this one. Graham's going to give us any audience questions, but any advice for the next 100,000th student? So we're celebrating, we're taking a week to take a pause and reflect, but we're on to the next 100,000. Any advice, Siobhan?
Yes, that's build a relationship with your mentor or coach, and just trust them as you're going through college, and take advantage of tutoring hours. That's very important.
That's great. JC?
I would say get involved. Some of my favorite college memories are in clubs that I joined and extracurriculars that I did outside of class. So getting involved really made college what it was for me. And I absolutely loved college. So I want everyone to do the same. Get involved and find things that you're passionate about outside of class.
That's great. Sam, how about you?
Yeah, I think with that, just keep your eye on the prize and, continue to not lose that relentless focus on what the end game is, and keep on keeping on, and don't give up when you hit roadblocks, because you have support around you in our state, and thanks to many partners that care and stay student focused. I think that just stay focused, and don't let any hiccups get in your way.
That's great. Fantastic. Graham, do we have any questions from the audience?
Sam, I think you saw the question from Bertha there about bringing it to other counties, and you kind of touched on that a little bit about taking it statewide. Maybe I'm going to elaborate just a little bit. Let's say you do have this idea, and you talked about writing a proposal for Mr. Haslam that included 5 or 6 things. How do you approach those conversations when you think you've identified someone that might be willing to support a program like this? And then I guess Chrissy and JC, kind of how do you go about implementing? What's your advice for people that are looking to do those 2 things?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. I think that mentioned that the idea for this started with the grant component and built out the other elements. And so I think that just like a well-defined plan of like how all the things will work is important. Knowing that those were the things that I think that Mr. Haslam had a lot of questions about. I think he called them like some of the special projects initially. I joke with Chrissy about that, but really like making the case that these are the things that are going to complement this piece. And I think that kind of not, I think that the completion grant piece was like the exciting part, the big, like the shiny object, but I think that the pieces holding it up, thinking those through and having a committed partner like Tennessee Achieves that can actually run with it and make it happen is important in the community. So I think that would be the best advice as a starting point, would be to think through how all the pieces will fit together and work toward the larger whole.
Yeah, and I think for implementation purposes, I mean, it helped to have Tennessee Achieves already doing much of this work with students. So it felt like a natural fit for us. Like I said, we had already been doing the work in a wide sort of way. And now we were able to really dig deep with students. One of the things though that I've loved about Knox Promise that oftentimes is missed when we talk about Tennessee Promise is that we were able to come full circle and start a program small. And as Sam said multiple times, we're doing a lot of research, which we were doing in the early days of Knox Achieves as well. And so we will have a very real proof point if we do decide to take these to other communities to say, hey, this is what we think is the magic of Knox Promise. And we have both qualitative and quantitative evidence to show you that this is why this work is critical to the success of students. And so I think, if it's not a Tennessee Achieves like entity, implementation, I think is best when you have doers. So again, going back to that roll up your sleeve kind of attitude. And I always say this, when we hire at Tennessee Achieves, everyone comes in as a coach. You must start at Tennessee Achieves at the ground level, working with students before you can, do some other role here. Because having that on the ground experience with students is what provides the foundation for every other job that exists at Tennessee Achieves. But most important to that role, or any role in any organization that's working with students, is fit. And I've been really fortunate that I have 26 colleagues here that wake up every day and think about what's best for students. And so implementation, I think, is easy when you have the right team. And I'm very fortunate to have the team that we have here that's constantly thinking in an innovative, disruptive way about students and student success. Anything to add to that, JC?
From a coach's perspective, I think for implementation, it's really important to get to know your community and dig deep and find those resources that maybe nobody knows about. Whenever we were first starting Knox Promise, we actually all took maybe a couple days. It took us a while to find all the things we have, and actually just made a list of a ton of resources for everything from transportation to housing issues to food insecurity that were already available in Knox County that maybe our students didn't know about. So I just think that when you're first starting out, you may not have all the answers, but you can find things that are already there and build relationships with those existing entities that are there to help students, and then go from there.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and I think with that too, like making sure, one other thought I had was like starting with big, clear goals in mind from the beginning of what you want to impact. And I think, hearing from Siobhan today, it's been very clear to me that what we wanted to happen is happening at the student level, and it's really encouraging. And I think just having those goals clearly defined and set out, and then the clear tenets underneath it of a plan, sounds simple, but is important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good advice from everybody. Siobhan, we'll ask you the last question, and then we'll turn it over to Chrissy to close us out. We've got a question from Amy who asks,
Okay.
what's something that you think people that are working with college students need to know? So we've got mentors on the call, we've got college personnel on the call, and she kind of followed up with, like, what is an assumption that people make about college students that maybe isn't true, and what should they know about working with college students?
That I'm not sure, but I mean, every college student have their own things that they deal with, and if you need help, or if there's something you're struggling with, you can be able to reach out to them, and they would be able to either point you in the right direction, or they can try and see if they can help you in any way they can, and they do a great job at that.
Well, I think Siobhan sort of really summed up the work that we've been doing for the last 12 years. What keeps me up at night is that I want to operate at the scale of 100,000, but I know how important it is that we meet each student exactly where they are on that one-to-one level. And so thinking about that every day is both exhilarating and also exhausting, because we do have this massive scale of students. But I will say, and I began with this, Knox Promise has been a gift to this program, not only in the way that it has allowed us to work with students in the way that we've always dreamed of working with students, but also in the way that we're learning things that we didn't know even 2 years ago about how students and families can best be served by our program. So I want to thank our panelists, Siobhan and JC and Sam, for spending time with us this afternoon. This has been insightful and thoughtful. And I am just thrilled, Siobhan, to see you go on and become an orthopedic surgeon. I mean, that's such a big deal.
It is. It's going to be a long way.
Yeah, you can do it though. I have this feeling that you're going to do it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. I really enjoyed it. I know everyone that tuned in did as well. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You guys as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.